Our next math tutorial uses the square root property to solve equations. Now, before we get into this, we should go back and talk about factoring and how we would have solved this equation by using factoring. X squared equals 9. Now, in the chapter where we talked about factoring and solving equations, what I would do is I would set the equation equal to 0 first. So I would start by subtracting 9 from both sides. In this case, that would leave me with x squared minus 9 equals 0. Now, I recognize this as the difference of two perfect squares, and so I can factor that according to that pattern. Factors into x plus 3 times x minus 3 that equals 0. So if I know this is true, then one of these factors has to be 0. So if x plus 3 equals 0, that gives me an answer for x of negative 3. And if this factor, x minus 3 equals 0, when I solve it, that gives me an answer of positive 3. So x can equal either negative 3 or positive 3 in this problem. If either of those is squared, you get 9. So that leads us into the square root property. Now, I can solve a problem like this by simply taking the square root. I don't need to go through all the factoring. Remember how much fun factoring was. So instead of factoring, we can solve this. We can isolate the x by simply taking its square root. Now, because we're working with an equation, I have to treat both sides the same, just like if I'm subtracting over here or adding or multiplying. So I have to take the square root of the right-hand side as well. So the square root of x squared just gives me x. The square root of 9 is 3, but I also have to remember that the answer could be negative 3. That came from this. So when I'm solving one of these, when I get to this point and I take the square root of 9, it's positive or negative 3. Because I should get the same answers that I got over here. So just remember that after you take the square root, the answer could be positive or negative. Now let's look at another one that's maybe a little bit harder. X squared minus 18 equals 0. And let's solve the problem the same way that we did this one using the square root property. So the first thing I want to do to try to isolate the x is to add 18 to both sides. So I'm left with x squared equals 18. Now to solve this for x, I need to take the square root of both sides. On the left, that just gives me x. But on this side now, I have positive or negative square root of 18. Now, there's no square root for 18 because it's not a perfect square. So it's not quite as easy as this one was, where I could just take the square root of 9. So what we have to do here is we have to simplify this if we can. So I'm looking for a factor of 18 that's a perfect square, and I can use 9. So this will simplify into 9 times 2. And if I break these apart into separate square roots, now I know what the square root of 9 is. That's 3. So the answer then equals plus or minus 3 times the square root of 2. So that's as far as you can simplify one like that. This one was a little bit harder because the number I was working with was not a perfect square.